Welcome to my channel. I'm Ben. Tonight, we step into a tightening radius of fear, a rumor with teeth, a pattern that might be coincidence, or a hunter's shadow moving between the trees. The 6th of March, Norwalk, Connecticut. Rain swells the Norwalk River. The current pulls hard and cold. A drone hovers, then points. Recovery teams move. A woman's body, 35, from West Islip, comes out of the water, and with it the first question. Is the river the story, or merely the stage? The same day, 180 miles north in Plymouth, Massachusetts, a shed hunter kicks through leaves off Route 3. Not antlers. A skull, small, discolored, jaw gone, waiting under the damp. What belongs to whom? How long has weather been erasing the answers? 2 weeks later, a suitcase appears by the gates of Colonel Ledyard Cemetery in Groton. Inside, the dismembered remains of a 58-year-old woman. The arrest comes, a confession follows, then a death in jail, and the rumor stutters briefly, but it does not die. Bodies, remains, discoveries across New Haven, Foster, Killingly, Framingham, some ruled suspicious, some still undetermined. Families grieve in different voices, but the chorus is the same. Tell us what happened. Tell us why. Authorities push back against panic. The head of the Massachusetts State Police says there is no evidence today of a serial killer, but that analysts are tracking each case, fitting victimology and geography onto the board, waiting to see what pattern refuses to go away. It's not denial, it's discipline, and it may be the only way to tell a cruel coincidence from a design. Meanwhile, the forest keeps its own counsel. Water carries, fire reveals, and the ground stores what it can until someone looks closely enough to see the seam. If there is a single author here, they understand terrain, time, and the places where the living rarely linger. So we begin where the rumor begins, with distance, with weather, with a suitcase, and with silence. Are these isolated tragedies, each with its own private cause, or the threaded footprints of someone who knows how to move in the dark? New England isn't just a patchwork of old mill towns and jagged coastlines. It's a region that clings to its histories, even when those histories turn dark. The victims in this chain of tragedies came from different towns, different lives, but they shared something in common. They vanished into quiet spaces, places where the air itself feels older. Paige Fannon was 35, raised on Long Island's South Shore. Friends remember her as fiercely loyal, the kind of person who would show up at your door at midnight if you needed help. She'd been visiting Connecticut, and whatever brought her to Norwalk ended in the cold push of a swollen river. The loss to her family was sudden, unnatural, like a book with its last chapter torn away. The unidentified woman in Plymouth is known only through fragments, a skull under leaves, bone weathered to a strange hue. The find caught the attention of families still searching for women like Sandra Crispo and Brittany McCormick. For them, each news alert is a painful maybe. Suzanne Worms lived in Groton, a coastal town shadowed by naval history. At 58, she had survived life's swells and setbacks. But the man once inside her home, 68-year-old Donald Kofel, would end her life with a baseball bat, according to his own grim confession. That case has a name, a suspect, a conclusion, yet it still sits uneasily beside the others. Denise Leary's story was quieter. 59, living in New Haven. She had battled paranoid schizophrenia. She vanished in September 2024. Her body found months later in a wooded lot. Officials have not called it murder, but her absence fits the same geography of loss. Michelle Romano's name carried warmth in Foster, Rhode Island. At 56, she was a devoted mother of 2, described as generous to a fault. She went missing for 8 months before a search turned up her remains. The circumstances are still officially suspicious, a word that leaves more open than it closes. And then there are the unnamed remains found in Killingly, Connecticut, near water and rail. Remains uncovered in Framingham during a brush fire. A woman on a Springfield bike path. Each discovery widens the map, deepens the uncertainty. If there is a single perpetrator, they are not bound by state lines. They move through Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, as if tracing a shape only they can see. If there is no connection, then each of these lives ended alone, but close enough in time and place to stir the same fears. The Massachusetts State Police, through Colonel Jeffrey Noble, speak cautiously. There is no evidence today of a serial killer. Yet, in his words, they are tracking each case. In the language of investigators, tracking means watching the details. Victim profiles, last known movements, the environments where bodies surface. Age, gender, lifestyle, each factor becomes a line on the board. These victims were not invisible. They lived in small cities and rural towns, places where people tend to notice when someone is missing. But they still vanished. And the circumstances of their deaths, whether violent, accidental, or undetermined, have left gaps that no official statement can fill. The common ground between them is unsettling. Wooded spaces, waterways, peripheral roads. They are the places you pass without thinking, the shoulder of a highway, the quiet bend of a river, the path that feels safe until it doesn't. And somewhere in those spaces lies either a truth about one calculating predator or the harder truth that danger can take many shapes at once. In the space of weeks, the map of New England filled with red pins, each marking a place where life stopped, where evidence began. The sequence is brutal in its compression. The 6th of March, Norwalk, Connecticut. The Norwalk River was running high from the night's heavy rain. The current churned brown and fast beneath the Grist Mill Road Bridge. Local police, joined by the fire department's dive team, recovered the body of Paige Fannon near the bank. Her clothing and personal effects lay scattered nearby, caught in reeds. No one saw her enter the water. No vehicle was found abandoned on the road above. To some, it looked like misadventure. To others, the river seemed too far from anywhere she should have been. That same day, 3 hours' drive north, a hunter moving through scrub near Route 3 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, spotted a pale shape under the leaf litter. It was a human skull, the nasal bones and lower jaw gone, weathered to a greenish tint. The rest of the body was absent. The location was remote, accessible by a thin trail that ended in a tangle of brush. Whoever placed it there had either walked in carrying death or used the cover of night to do the same. The 19th of March, Groton, Connecticut. A hard-sided suitcase, maroon in color, sat abandoned near the wrought iron gates of Colonel Ledyard's cemetery. The groundskeeper who opened it will not forget what he saw: sections of a woman's body, later identified as Suzanne Worms. The crime scene extended to her home, where investigators found signs of struggle. Donald Kofel, who had once lived with her, was questioned and confessed. He described striking her with a baseball bat until her skull cracked, then cutting her apart to make her easier to transport. His death in custody ended the chance to question him further. The 20th of March, New Haven, Connecticut. In a patch of woods about 30 miles from Norwalk, the body of Denise Leary lay in advanced decomposition. Missing since the previous September, she had last been seen at her home. There were no clear signs of trauma, but the months had erased much of the evidence. To the untrained eye, she was simply another of the dead. To trained eyes, she was part of a pattern, whether of coincidence or intent. The 26th of March, Foster, Rhode Island. 8 months after Michelle Romano vanished, her remains were found in woods less than 10 miles from Killingly, Connecticut. Friends had kept her name alive on social media. The discovery cut off hope. Investigators called the circumstances suspicious, a word they used sparingly. Days later, police searched a house in Warwick believed to be her last known address. The 9th of April, Killingly, Connecticut. On a dead-end road near a body of water and rail lines, unidentified human remains were located. The scene was quiet, almost soundless, but for the wind in the trees. The remoteness offered both opportunity and cover. The 10th of April, Framingham, Massachusetts. A brush fire burned close to the Massachusetts Turnpike. Firefighters found bones in the ash remains that appeared to have been there for months. Early assessments suggested no foul play, but in the context of the other cases, the claim felt like an asterisk. The 22nd of April, Springfield, Massachusetts. Near a bike path on Hall of Fame Avenue, the body of 5-year-old Megan Meredith was discovered. It was daylight. People walked by. Yet she had been there long enough for her name to move from missing persons to the coroner's ledger. Each scene told its own story in soil, water, and air. The Norwalk River offered the violence of current and rain. Plymouth's woods, the patience of decay. Groton, the deliberate concealment of a suitcase. New Haven, the slow erasure of time. Foster, the finality of suspicion. Killingly, the quiet of a dead end. Framingham, the anonymity of fire. Springfield, the public space hiding a private end. Distances link them loosely 10 miles, 180 threads across state lines. For some, that's enough to draw the shape of a hunter's range. For others, the differences in method, victim profile, and circumstance argue for coincidence. But the timing is harder to dismiss. 8 deaths or discoveries in under 2 months, spread across 3 states, in locations that share one trait. They are liminal spaces, edges between populated and empty. Waterways, wooded paths, unused roads, places where someone could work quickly, unseen. The absence of clear witnesses binds them together as much as anything else. No one saw Paige go into the river. No one saw the suitcase placed by the cemetery gate. No one saw the person who left a skull under the Plymouth leaves. Even in Springfield, where people pass the bike path daily, no one came forward with the moment Megan's body appeared. If these are connected, the perpetrator understands 2 things: how to choose a place that holds the body long enough to blur the timeline, and how to vary the disposal method enough to break a pattern. That's the kind of variation that buys time, that makes each case look isolated until someone lays the maps on top of each other. The maps are already on the wall at multiple agencies. Whether the lines between the pins will ever be inked in is the question hanging over every desk. But if there is one person behind it all, the next pin could already be in their mind. From the moment Paige Fannon's body was pulled from the Norwalk River, the case files began to multiply. Local detectives photographed the riverbank, mapped the positions of her belongings, and logged the water temperature, current speed, and weather reports. There was no obvious trauma on the body, but the medical examiner needed time and toxicology to decide if she had drowned by accident or if someone had helped the river take her. That same day in Plymouth, the discovery of the skull drew a different response. Massachusetts State Police secured the perimeter, called in crime scene services, and sifted the soil for smaller bones or artifacts. They measured the discoloration, checked for cut marks, and consulted a forensic anthropologist to estimate time since death. DNA extraction was requested, but without a match in CODIS, the remains remained a John or Jane Doe. Parallel checks were made with missing persons bulletins, especially the unsolved disappearances of Sandra Crispo and Brittany McCormick. Groton's case broke differently. The suitcase, once opened, gave police an immediate probable cause. Donald Kofel was identified quickly, neighbors recognized him, and his name was on past police reports. Detectives obtained a search warrant for his residence, collected the baseball bat he mentioned, and photographed every stain, every splinter. When Kofel confessed, the details he gave matched the forensic evidence: fracture patterns on the skull, transfer stains on the bat, and the presence of dismemberment tools. His death in jail closed the legal file, but left investigators wondering if he might have known more than he'd said. In New Haven, the Leary case required patience. The state of decomposition meant few visible clues. Search teams combed her last known address for signs of forced entry or struggle. None were found. Her medical history, especially her mental health records, became part of the file. With no clear cause of death, the case was left open but not classified as homicide. Michelle Romano's remains in Foster triggered a multi-agency effort. Rhode Island State Police coordinated with Warwick detectives to search the house linked to her last known address. Luminol tests in the home came back negative for blood. Friends and family were re-interviewed. The suspicious circumstances label remained, partly because the cause of death could not be conclusively established. The unidentified remains in Killingly brought Connecticut State Police into the already complex web. They issued a carefully worded statement: no known link to other cases, no threat to the public. Yet internally, analysts flagged the location near water, near rails, as fitting a recurring geography. Framingham's brush fire find was processed by both local police and the DA's office. The burned remains made it difficult to recover trace evidence. A forensic anthropologist examined the bones, noting no obvious signs of sharp force or ballistic trauma. Still, The timing and location kept the case on the analyst's shared board. Springfield's bike path death was more public, and thus more politically sensitive. The DA emphasized ongoing investigation while avoiding any speculation about links to other cases. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was collected, but no clear image emerged of a suspect, or even the moment the victim arrived at that location. In the background, the Massachusetts State Police Fusion Center and their counterparts in Connecticut and Rhode Island shared data through secure channels. The tracking Colonel Noble described meant comparing victim demographics, last-seen data, dump site characteristics, and timelines. Cases like Grotton's, with an identified suspect, were gradually removed from the working list. The others stayed pinned, their lines on the board shifting as new information came in. There were no formal charges linking any two cases together, but in quiet rooms, away from press statements, analysts continued to weigh whether coincidence could explain them all. The question driving them was simple. Are they chasing several killers at once, or one who knows how to disappear between jurisdictions? Of all the cases scattered across the New England map, only one reached the courtroom: the murder of Suzanne Worms in Groton, Connecticut. Even here, the arc was short: an arrest, a confession, and the defendant's death in custody. But the brief window between arraignment and his demise offered a glimpse of how prosecutors might have approached a connected case, had one existed. Donald Coffell's arraignment drew a mix of local reporters and a handful of curious onlookers who had read about the suitcase murder. He shuffled into court in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles shackled, the sound of chains barely louder than the scratching of reporters' pens. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused as the clerk read out the charges: murder, tampering with evidence, improper disposal of a body. The prosecutor outlined the bare facts for the record: that on or about the 19th of March, Coffell killed Suzanne Worms in her residence, struck her with a baseball bat, and later dismembered her body before placing it into a suitcase abandoned near Colonel Ledyard Cemetery. They spoke of blood evidence found in the home, consistent with blunt force trauma, and of tools recovered that bore both the victim's DNA and his fingerprints. The defense attorney offered no denial, only a request for a competency evaluation, citing Coffell's history of mental health issues and erratic behavior. It was a move that hinted at an eventual insanity defense, though no plea had yet been entered. Outside the courtroom, cameras caught the reactions of Suzanne's family. They did not speak to the press, but their expressions, tight jaws, lowered eyes, were enough to fill headlines. The community, already unsettled by the other unsolved deaths in the region, watched this case as if it might open the door to answers about the rest. It didn't. Before the case could proceed to the evidentiary phase, Coffell died in jail. The official statement cited natural causes, but the timing left a vacuum. Without a trial, the state's evidence would never be tested in open court. For investigators, it was a closed file. For the public, it was unfinished business. And so the courtroom chapter in the larger serial killer conversation ended almost as soon as it began. No dramatic cross-examination, no jury weighing patterns and coincidences, no moment where a prosecutor could stand before 12 citizens and suggest that the suitcase was just one stop on a longer route. The unanswered question lingered. If a trial had been held, would it have revealed threads linking Groton to Norwalk, Plymouth, Foster, and beyond? Or would it have confirmed that this killing stood alone? Brutal, but solitary? Looking at these cases through the dual lens of psychology and law is like trying to read a palimpsest, layers of meaning written over one another, some deliberately obscured. If there is a single offender, their psychological profile is complex. The variation in method: water, concealment, open-air abandonment. Fire suggests adaptability rather than compulsion to repeat a signature. That points toward an organized offender, someone capable of altering tactics to avoid detection, willing to sacrifice the satisfaction of ritual for the safety of unpredictability. Such offenders often have above-average intelligence, a working knowledge of police procedure, and a detached view of their victims as interchangeable opportunities rather than personal targets. From a victimology standpoint, the apparent randomness of age, health, and circumstances in these deaths complicates profiling. Serial offenders who avoid detection for long periods sometimes choose victims without an obvious link, forcing investigators to rely on geographic and temporal patterns. The Norwalk to Plymouth timing the same day was enough to ignite online theories. But without more, it's smoke without a confirmed fire. Legally, the challenge is that each case resides in its own jurisdiction. Without a shared suspect or forensic-linked DNA, ballistic match, unique tool-mark prosecutors cannot combine them into a single indictment. The Groton case, with a confession and clear evidence, stands apart. It could not be used to imply guilt in the others without a direct bridge. This is why Colonel Noble's choice of the word tracking is significant. It implies active observation without the legal threshold to merge investigations. There's also the question of public messaging. Law enforcement must walk the narrow path between transparency and preventing panic. Admitting the possibility of a serial killer without solid evidence risks both false accusations and the emboldening of the perpetrator. Conversely, outright denial, if later disproven, undermines trust. The Massachusetts State Police's cautious language is a study in legal risk management. Psychologically, if these cases are unrelated, they still feed a narrative in the public mind. Clusters of deaths in similar environments create a perception of hunting grounds. That perception can alter behavior, draw resources to certain areas, and unintentionally shape investigative priorities. For a true predator, this is fertile ground for manipulation. They can hide in the noise, or even contribute to it. One must also consider the learning criminal. Cases like Israel Keys show how offenders study both successful and failed investigations, adjusting their approach. Media coverage of these New England deaths, especially detailed geographic descriptions, could serve as free reconnaissance for anyone inclined to exploit it. In court, if a suspect were ever charged with multiple murders from this cluster, prosecutors would need more than circumstantial geography. They'd require a through line, consistent forensic trace, matching behavioral indicators, or an admission. Absent that, defense attorneys would dismantle the linkage as coincidence, reminding juries that tragedy does not equal conspiracy. The final psychological takeaway is unsettling. Whether connected or not, these cases have collectively altered the sense of safety in the region. And if there is one mind behind them, they're watching that change, measuring it, and perhaps deciding where the next absence should appear. By the end of spring, the map of New England was still dotted with unanswered questions. The official statements remain careful: no confirmed serial killer, no public threat identified, but the atmosphere in towns from Norwalk to Plymouth had shifted. People walked with a sharper awareness of their surroundings. Joggers along river paths carried pepper spray. Parents checked in more often with their adult children. In Groton, the death of Donald Cofell closed the only case with a named suspect, but it left the victim's family without the public reckoning of a trial. For them, justice felt unfinished, as if the truth had been buried with him. Families of the unidentified, meanwhile, continued their own parallel investigations. Flyers stayed up in small-town diners. Facebook groups swapped theories, timelines, and sightings. Some threads spiraled into speculation. Others gathered legitimate tips. Law enforcement monitored these spaces, knowing that the same forum that fuels rumor can also deliver a break. In Massachusetts, Colonel Noble's words about tracking the cases became a kind of mantra for both reassurance and suspicion. To some, it meant the state police were on top of the situation. To others, it sounded like a polite way of admitting they might have a predator they couldn't yet prove. Media coverage ebbed and flowed, surging with each new discovery. The New England serial killer headline, accurate or not, proved irresistible to national outlets, which in turn amplified local fears. Retired profilers and former agents appeared on news segments to dissect the geography, the victim profiles, the gaps in official narratives. Each appearance kept the story alive. Legally, nothing tied the majority of the cases together, but in the public mind, they were already bound. The human brain craves patterns, and when 8 deaths appear in a tight cluster of time and place, coincidence becomes a harder sell. If there is no connection, the aftermath is still sobering. A reminder that danger is not always a shadowy figure stalking a single city, but a series of unlinked tragedies that together erode the sense of safety If there is a connection, the aftermath is a warning that someone may still be moving along the borders of 3 states, comfortable in the space between proof and suspicion. In either case, the ripple effect has settled into the region's culture. It is in the wary glances at trailheads, the side eye to unfamiliar cars parked on rural roads, the unspoken calculation of risk when walking alone. And somewhere, whether in the mind of one person or scattered among many, sits the knowledge that the story is not finished. Because stories like this only truly end when the last pin comes off the map. And in New England, the board is still full. What's been unfolding in New England is a stark reminder. Safety is never guaranteed. Whether these cases are connected or not, they show that places we take for granted, a forest trail, a quiet river bend, or a deserted street corner, can hide dangerous secrets. Staying alert doesn't mean living in fear. It means being aware of your surroundings, trusting your instincts, and knowing when to keep your distance. It's also a call for communities to look out for one another, share information, and speak up, because sometimes one small detail can be the key to solving a much bigger mystery. I want to hear from you. Do you think these cases are just a tragic coincidence, or the work of a predator who knows how to stay hidden? Do you believe law enforcement is keeping certain facts under wraps to protect the investigation, or have they truly found no connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to keep following gripping true crime stories and in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. This story isn't over, and maybe you'll be the one to help uncover the truth.